You've just destroyed a $20,000 door." My son-in-law's mother hissed, her eyes like ice. I held my daughter Sophie's shivering body tighter. Her lips were blue. "And you," I said, my voice low, "have just induced stage 2 hypothermia. You're lucky I'm not calling 911. She locked herself out. My son-in-law Ryan yelled, his face red. It's another one of her emotional stunts. His mother Elaine didn't even look at him. She just stared at Sophie with cold disappointment. "We've invested so much in her, Clara. Fertility treatments, therapy, and zero ROI. She's a failed investment." My daughter. A failed investment. To understand how I, a retired surgeon, ended up using a tire iron to shatter a wall of glass just to save my own child, we need to go back 6 hours. 6 hours earlier, I was just a mother in her car. I was on I-10 West, somewhere between Houston and nowhere, in my 1998 Volvo station wagon. That car had 250,000 miles on it, and the driver's seat was worn into the exact shape of my body. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and the dark roast coffee I'd spilled a decade ago. This car had carried me through 2 decades of 3 a.m. trauma calls. It was reliable. It never failed me. On the passenger seat I had a big Yeti cooler. Inside, a 15-pound brisket from Miller's, still warm, wrapped in butcher paper. It was my peace offering, my surprise. Sophie, my daughter, had always said that brisket was the only thing that made her forgive me for all the birthdays I'd missed. But this trip, this wasn't just a happy post-Thanksgiving surprise. I'm a retired ER surgeon. For 40 years, my job was to look at a patient and, in under 30 seconds, know if they were sick or not sick. You don't just look at the patient, you look at the chart. You read the story. And Sophie's chart. It was all wrong. The check engine light in my gut had been flashing for months, ever since she married Ryan. I gripped the worn leather of the steering wheel. My hands, they're not pretty. They're marked with scalpel scars and dry from a lifetime of surgical soap. But they're steady. These hands have set the shattered bones of a child, stitched an aorta back together, held a human heart while it started to beat again. They know the difference between something that's healing and something that's dying. And my daughter, my bright, sharp, funny Sophie, she was dying. I saw it 2 days ago, on Thanksgiving. We'd done a video call. Ryan's family was all there in that house of theirs in the Austin Hills. It looks less like a home and more like an Apple store designed by a vampire. All glass and black steel. They were all gathered around a table that looked like a prop. Ryan, in a $1,000 sweater, raised his wine glass to the camera. "Happy Thanksgiving, Clara. We're optimizing our gratitude this year." Optimizing gratitude. Who says that? Then the camera panned to Sophie. She was sitting at the end of the table, looking small, swimming in a beige cashmere sweater the color of dust. "Sophie, honey, you look quiet," I'd said. She'd given me a smile. It was thin, tight, a band-aid of a smile. "Just tired, Mom." Ryan had me on a new N of 1 protocol, just recalibrating. Before I could ask what that meant, Ryan's mother Elaine leaned into the frame. She's a woman who looks like she was carved from expensive marble. "Clara, dear," she'd said, her voice smooth as glass, "we're just so grateful this year. We were just saying, we're hoping that by next Thanksgiving, we'll have more to be grateful for." And she'd let her eyes drop, just for a second, to Sophie's stomach. It was a surgical strike, a perfectly placed incision, meant to bleed. Sophie's smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. She'd just nodded. The old Sophie? The Sophie who'd painted a mural of a phoenix on her college dorm wall? She would have had a comeback. Something witty, something that would have put Elaine right back in her box. But this version of my daughter just took it. I hated that I hadn't driven up right then. Ryan, he didn't marry a person, he acquired a partner. He was a biohacker, one of those tech bros who believes death is just a problem to be solved. He'd told me once, at their wedding, "Sophie has fantastic genetic markers, Clara. Top tier. We just need to debug her system, get the pregnancy to take." Debug her system. Like my daughter was a piece of faulty code. Like her body, her heart, her soul was just a machine that wasn't performing to spec, and her miscarriages, they weren't tragedies to him. They were iteration failures. My Volvo's engine hummed, a low, steady thrum. It was the same sound as the old MRI machine in the basement of the hospital, a sound that meant investigation. I felt a familiar calm settle over me, the same one that always came before a critical case. The highway hum was my scrub-in. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, clear focus. I remembered a resident, years ago, a kid fresh out of med school, shaking so hard he could barely hold a suture. We had a multi-car pileup, a guy on the table, bleeding out. "Dr. Clark, we're losing him," the kid had yelled, his voice cracking. The monitor was screaming, that high-pitched, steady beep of a flatline. I put my hand on the resident's shoulder. My voice was flat, bored even. "No, we're not," I'd said. "He's not lost. We just have to go find him. Scalpel." And that's what I was doing now. I was driving to find my daughter. The flat, green expanse of I-10 finally gave way to the sharp, scrubby hills of Austin. The sky was a heavy, bruised purple-gray. A blue norther was blowing in, one of those vicious Texas cold fronts that drops the temperature 30 degrees in an hour. The air outside looked wet and mean. I saw the skyline, a forest of cranes and new glass towers, a city that had sold its soul for a stock option. Ryan's house was tucked up in Westlake Hills, a place where people bought views, not homes. I turned off the highway, the Yeti cooler sliding on the seat. The brisket. That brisket was my canary in the coal mine. I'd bring it in. If Sophie lit up, if I saw even a spark of the old her, I could relax. I could be mom, not doctor. But if she looked at that brisket, and I saw nothing, then I'd know. I pulled out my phone, hit the Bluetooth. "Call Sophie." The car was silent, except for the ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. "Hey, you've reached Sophie. I'm probably elbow deep in a new painting, so leave a message. Or don't. Whatever." My heart clenched. That was her old message. From before, elbow deep in a new painting. She hadn't painted in over a year. Ryan had optimized her studio into a home gym. I hung up, my hands tightening on the wheel. "It's fine," I whispered. "She's just busy." I tried again. Ring. 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 Voicemail. The dread was no longer a gut feeling. It was a diagnosis. This wasn't a missed call. This was a symptom. I took the exit, my foot heavy on the gas. The surgeon in me was quiet. The mother was screaming. But I held them both back. I just drove. I was trained to find the disease. And I was going to cut it out. The first step in any diagnosis is to gather more data. I kept one hand on the wheel and used the car's built-in Bluetooth to call the one person I knew would lie to me. He picked up on the second ring, his voice booming with that false, aggressive cheerfulness that tech bros use as armor. "Clara, what's up? Happy Thanksgiving week? We're just crushing it over here." My voice, by contrast, was flat, clinical. "Hi, Ryan. I'm just pulling into Austin. I was hoping to stop by with some brisket, but Sophie isn't picking up her phone." There was a pause. Not a long one, but just enough for the static on the line to hiss. Then he laughed. It was a dry, breathy, "Ha. Ah, yeah, about that. She's defragging right now." I gripped the wheel. The Volvo's old, cracked leather groaned under my hands. "Defragging," I repeated the word. It felt foreign and sharp in my mouth, like a piece of glass. "I'm a doctor, Ryan. That isn't a medical term." "Exactly, see? That's the analog thinking we're trying to move past." I could hear the smirk in his voice. He sounded like he was pacing around his giant, empty room, enjoying this. "It's a protocol, Clara. It's about optimizing her headspace. She's been running a lot of, let's call it, legacy code. Old emotional loops. We're just clearing the cache. Legacy code, emotional loops." He wasn't just gaslighting me. He was rebranding his abuse. He had taken my daughter's suffering, the grief from her miscarriages, the pain of his family's cruelty, and turned it into a software bug. My own voice turned cold. "Ryan, is she sick? Does she need to be seen?" "See? Sick. That's the problem. It's not about being sick, it's about performance. We're on a clean data cycle. The best thing for her is zero input. No distractions, we're just recalibrating." Is she painting at all?" I asked, a desperate last attempt to find my daughter in all this jargon. Her old voicemail. It said she was. He laughed again, louder this time. "Oh, that, God no, we deprecated that. Months ago. The fumes, the mess. It's just not conducive to a high-performance cognitive environment. We're focused on inputs, Clara. Clean food, optimized light, data-driven meditation, not splashing paint around." He deprecated her art. He deprecated her soul. I said, "I'm 5 minutes away, Ryan. I'll see you soon." The fake warmth vanished, replaced by a steel edge. "Not a good time, Clara. The protocol is extremely sensitive right now." And he clicked off. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "She'll call you back." He didn't say, "Goodbye." He just disconnected. The car was silent. The only sound was the thwack, thwack, thwack of the windshield wipers. The rain was starting to tick against the glass. Ice. The blue norther was here. My hands, my steady surgeon's hands, the ones that had held a beating heart, were shaking with a rage so cold and pure it felt like liquid oxygen. He had her in a box, a clean, minimalist glass and steel box, and he was running a protocol on her. He had convinced her that her grief was legacy code. He'd convinced her that her art, her life, was a mess. He'd isolated her. He'd convinced her that her own mother was analog thinking, a distraction, that I was dirty data. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a hostage situation. Just then, my phone buzzed in its cradle. A text message. I glanced at the screen. Ben C. My heart stopped. Ben. A name from a better time. Ben wasn't new Austin. He was old Austin. He was Sophie's best friend from her art program in college. A sculptor, a woodworker, a guy who built things with his hands. He believed in wood grain and hand-sanded joints and things that lasted. He was everything Ryan wasn't. Tangible, real, warm. Ryan, in a move of pure, breathtaking arrogance, had hired Ben's small company to do the custom woodwork for their monstrosity of a house. Ryan liked to talk about artisans. He thought they were quaint. For the first year, Ben had been my mole. He'd been Sophie's one link to her old life. They'd text. He'd stop by to check on a cabinet. Then about 6 months ago, the texts from her about Ben, they just stopped. I opened the message, my breath catching in my throat. "Hey, Dr. C. Hope you're well. Sorry to text out of the blue. This isn't my place, but I'm worried about Soph." I kept reading, my blood running colder with every word. "I was at the house today to fix a seal on the patio door, and things just felt wrong. Really wrong." She looked thin and scared. "Ryan and his mother wouldn't let me talk to her alone. She won't return my texts. If you're planning to visit, maybe make it soon. Just check on her." My mind, the surgeon's mind, latched onto the details, not my place. He was scared to overstep. Things just felt wrong. A craftsman, a builder. He knew, better than anyone, when a foundation was cracked. She looked scared. And then, the final critical piece of data. Today, to fix a seal on the patio door. He had been there today. He had seen her. A seal, a barrier, something designed to keep the outside out, and the inside in. This was it. This wasn't a gut feeling anymore. This was the second opinion. The data was in. The diagnosis was confirmed. This wasn't a protocol. It was a 5-alarm fire. I turned my windshield wipers on high. The sleet was coming down hard now, rattling against the glass like angry pebbles. I put the phone down. I didn't text Ben back. There was no time. I was no longer a mother coming for a visit. I was a surgeon on her way to an emergency. And I was about to make the incision. The incision point was a winding, private road in Westlake Hills, so steep my old Volvo whined in protest. The rain had turned to ice, a sharp, stinging sleet that coated the world in a crystalline shell. I rounded the final curve, and there it was. Ryan's house. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. A long, 2-story box of glass and black steel perched on the cliffside like a predatory bird. It was lit up from the inside, a glowing beacon in the storm. But it was a cold light. It looked like an advertisement for a high-end server, not a home for my daughter. I didn't bother with the long, sloping driveway, which was heated from underneath, melting the ice in perfect, clean lines. I pulled the Volvo right onto the manicured frozen grass, its headlights cutting across the lawn. The tires spun for a moment, tearing up the perfect turf. Good. I got out. The wind hit me so hard it stole my breath and plastered my coat to my body. It was 35 degrees and dropping, fast. The air was so cold it burned to breathe. And then I saw her. First, I saw the room. Through a massive, floor-to-ceiling pane of glass, I saw the party, the scene from the video call. Ryan was there, holding a wine glass, gesturing wildly, telling a story to his siblings. Elaine, his mother, was sitting in a low, modern chair, smiling, a picture of polished, aristocratic calm. There was a fire in a long, rectangular pit. It was cozy, it was warm. Then my eyes moved to the right, to the patio. Sophie. She was huddled in a sleek metal chair, the kind that must be agony to sit on in the cold. She was wearing thin silk pajamas, the same beige color as the sweater from Thanksgiving, the color of dust. The sleet had plastered her hair to her skull. My heart didn't break. It just stopped. Because she wasn't shivering violently anymore. She was just trembling. A fine, rapid tremor that shook her frame in small, tight bursts. In the ER, we know what that means. Violent shivering is stage 1 hypothermia. It's the body fighting. It's good. That fine, rapid tremor? That's stage 2. That's the body losing. That's when the core temperature is dropping. That's when the confusion sets in. That's when the organs begin to slow down. Her lips weren't just pale. They were blue, cyanotic. They were 10 feet away from her. 10 feet. And a pane of glass, laughing. My first instinct, the mother instinct, was to hammer on the glass, to scream, to beg them to let her in. But the surgeon in me took over. My pulse slowed. The world went very quiet, the only sound the hiss of the ice on the stone. Ryan's voice echoed in my head. Not a good time, Clara. 0 input. We're just recalibrating. Ben's text, he wouldn't let me talk to her alone. They knew she was out there. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a protocol. This was a clean data cycle. They had put my daughter, my child, in 3-5-degree and falling weather, in silk pajamas, to recalibrate her. I looked at the glass. It wasn't a window, it was a barrier. I looked at the family. They weren't in-laws, they were the disease. And I could not get to my patient by asking the disease for permission. I had to create an entry wound. My heart wasn't pounding. It was slow, steady. Each beat was a cold, hard choice. I turned around and walked back to my Volvo. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my skin. I didn't feel it. I popped the trunk. Inside, next to my emergency medical kit and a box of road flares, was my car's original issue tire iron, heavy, black, and real. I grabbed it. The metal was so cold it burned my hand. I walked back to the patio door. I didn't run. I was a surgeon approaching the table. I took the old wool towel I keep in the trunk for oil spills and wrapped it thick around my fist. A surgeon always protects her hands. I didn't aim for the center of the glass. I aimed for the lock, the sleek, brushed nickel smart lock that Ben had been there to fix. I pulled the tire iron back, and I struck. Once, twice, 3 times. Not a wild, raging swing, a precise, focused puncture. The tempered glass didn't shatter into 1,000 pieces. It popped, a dull, sickening sound. A spider web of 1,000,000 tiny cracks exploded from the point of impact. The entire pane, held together by its laminate, bowed inward. I pulled the tire iron back, and with the flat end, I pushed. The whole section of glass, lock and all, collapsed inward onto their $1 billion hand-woven rug. The warm, wine-scented air of their party rushed out, hitting the cold sleet. It created a visible cloud of steam, like a dragon's breath. The laughter stopped. For one long, perfect second, nobody moved. Ryan, Elaine, the siblings, they were all just frozen, staring. I didn't look at them. I didn't say a word. I stepped over the threshold, the glass crunching under my boots, and I went straight to my daughter. Straight to my patient. Sophie, Sophie. I touched her face. Her skin was waxy, clammy. I put 2 fingers on her neck, just under her jaw. Her pulse was thready and fast, tachycardic. Her body was trying to compensate. "Mom," she whispered, her eyes fluttering. She didn't even seem surprised, just tired. "I'm here, baby." I ripped off my own heavy wool coat, the one that had seen me through 40 Houston winters, and I wrapped it around her. I scooped her up. She weighed nothing. She felt like a bundle of cold sticks. I held her against my chest, her head lolling onto my shoulder, and I turned around. They were all standing now. Ryan, his face a mask of purple-red rage, his siblings, looking confused, and Elaine, standing by the fireplace, her wine glass still perfectly balanced in her hand. Her face wasn't shocked anymore. It was hard, pure reptilian anger, and that's when she spoke. "You've just destroyed a $20,000 door." Her voice wasn't a shout. It was flat, conversational. The voice you'd use to tell the waiter they brought you sparkling water instead of still. I stood there on their pristine, white-as-bone rug, the sleet melting from my old wool coat, forming a dark, spreading puddle, glass crunched under my boots. The icy wind I'd brought in with me swirled around the room, making the flames in their long, rectangular fireplace gutter and spit. Sophie's body in my arms gave another one of those small, tight shivers, the kind that meant her body was giving up the fight. I looked at Elaine. Her silver blonde hair was perfect. Her cream-colored cashmere outfit was perfect. She wasn't looking at her daughter-in-law, my child, who was blue. She was looking at the hole I had made, the empty space where her $20,000 piece of glass used to be. My daughter was a problem. The broken glass was the crisis. I adjusted my grip on Sophie. She was so light. Her skin, where it touched my neck, felt like wet parchment. I looked Elaine right in the eye. "And you," I said, my voice just as quiet, my trauma bay voice, "have just induced stage 2 hypothermia. You're lucky I'm not calling 911. A little sharp gasp came from Ryan's sister, who was standing by the kitchen island, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Ryan himself. He looked like a circuit had shorted. He'd been in the middle of a story, his arms spread wide, and he was still frozen in that position, his mouth hanging open. The error message in his brain finally cleared, replaced by pure, hot, incoherent rage. His face went from stunned white to a blotchy, dark red. You can't do that," he finally screamed. It was funny. He wasn't yelling at me for breaking the door. He was yelling at the situation. He was furious that his perfect, optimized, controlled environment had been breached. That an analog element, an old woman in a sensible coat, had corrupted his clean data. He took a step forward, his fists clenched. He pointed a shaking finger. Not at me. At Sophie. She locked herself out. She did it. It's another one of her stunts. A stunt. I looked down at Sophie. Her eyes were half closed, her lashes matted with ice. Her lips were a waxy, bluish gray. This was my daughter. The woman who, just 3 years ago, had run the Austin Half Marathon. The woman who had built a 6-foot canvas and painted a phoenix in our backyard, its wings so bright they looked like they were on fire. A stunt. The word was an obscenity. It was a word you use for a teenager slamming a door, not for a woman slipping into organ failure. "She's been doing this all week," Ryan raged on, his voice getting higher, cracking with a frantic, spoiled energy. "It's emotional blackmail. She knew we had guests. She knew it was cold. She wanted to make us look bad. She's non-compliant. Non-compliant. There it was. The other word. Their corporate, bloodless, inhuman word. My daughter wasn't a person to them. She was a piece of defective hardware. She was a program that refused to run. The room was spinning slightly. I could smell the sharp, acidic tang of spilled red wine on the rug, mixed with the wet wool smell of my coat and the faint, sweet scent of the brisket I'd left to get cold in the car. I could feel Sophie's breathing. It was too shallow. I didn't argue with him. I didn't scream. You can't argue with a zealot. You can't reason with a system. You can only bypass it. I turned my back on him, an act of dismissal so profound it felt like a slap, and walked to the long, low sofa by the fireplace. I laid Sophie down on the expensive, cream-colored cashmere cushions. "Call 911, I said, my back still to them. I was already on my knees, pulling my coat off her, chafing her arms, trying to get friction, trying to get blood flow. "We are not calling anyone." Elaine's voice cut through the air. It was sharp, cold, and absolutely final. I turned my head. She had taken a step forward. Her mask of polite, aristocratic indignation was gone. This was the real Elaine, the CEO, the one who actually ran this company. "This is a private family matter, Clara." She was talking to me like I was a rogue employee. "You have trespassed. You have destroyed our property. And now you are interfering in my son's marriage and my daughter-in-law's prescribed treatment." The word treatment hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "Her treatment," I said. The sound that came out of my mouth was a choked, disbelieving laugh. "You call this treatment? This is negligence. This is torture." "It's a protocol," Ryan shouted, sounding like a child defending a broken toy. "It's about resilience. It's about teaching her that her emotional outbursts have consequences." Consequences. The consequence he was doling out was death. I looked at him, really looked at him, the $1,000 sweater, the sleek, black smartwatch that was monitoring his heart rate, his sleep, his performance, and I finally, truly, saw him. He wasn't a husband, he was a project manager, and my daughter was his underperforming asset. "She's not an employee, Ryan," I said, my voice dangerously soft. He actually recoiled, as if I'd read his mind. "What? That's ridiculous. This whole thing," I said, gesturing around the sterile room, at the untouched food, at the terrified-looking siblings. "This is a performance review." And she failed. "That's it, isn't it?" Ryan just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He had no script for this. This wasn't in his protocol. Elaine, the one who wrote the scripts, stepped in. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on her son's arm, a signal for him to be quiet. She was the real power. "You need to leave, Clara. Now." Her voice was pure ice. "Take her and go. We will be in touch about the damages." She dismissed me. She dismissed Sophie, like we were a bad catering order she was sending back to the kitchen. I looked down at Sophie on the couch. Her eyes were fluttering open. She was trying to say something. I leaned in close, my hair brushing her cold, damp face. Cold," she whispered. "So cold." That was it. The last thread of my control. The last remnant of the calm, detached surgeon. The part of me that analyzed and diagnosed and stayed above the fray. It didn't just snap. It vaporized. I stood up straight, my knees cracking. I turned to face them. "She's cold," I said. "We heard her," Elaine said, her voice dripping with boredom. She actually checked her watch. "She's cold," I said again, my voice louder, vibrating with a force that made Ryan's sister flinch. "And you were warm." I pointed to the fireplace, to the wine glasses, to the comfortable, expensive chairs. "You sat here, 10 feet away, and you watched her freeze." And that's when Elaine, in a final act of pure, unadulterated arrogance, crossed her arms, lifted her chin, and said the line that would cost her everything. "We've invested so much in her," she said. Her voice was cold. Not angry, just calculating. The voice of an auditor, looking at a failed asset on a balance sheet. I just held my daughter, who was a dead weight in my arms. The wind from the broken door was making my eyes water. "Invested," I whispered. The word tasted like ash. "You invest in stocks. You invest in a 401k. You don't invest in a human being." "Of course," Elaine continued, her tone laced with a weary, condescending patience, as if she were explaining a simple stock portfolio to a child. "The fertility treatments, the hormone therapies, the private counseling, the optimization." She waved a perfectly manicured hand, as if the number was so vast, so obscene, it was beyond my small, analog comprehension. "We have spent a fortune," she said, her voice dropping to a sharp, confidential hiss, trying to fix her, trying to make her viable. Viable. The room was absolutely silent. The only sound was the sharp hiss of the ice-cold wind blowing through the hole I'd made, and the faint, shallow catch in Sophie's breathing. And for all of that, Elaine finished, her eyes as hard and dead as pebbles, "There has been zero ROI. ROI. Return. On. Investment." The blood in my veins didn't just run cold. It stopped. It turned to sludge. They hadn't been trying to help her. They had been trying to get a product. They weren't grieving the loss of their grandchildren. They were angry at the production line for shutting down. My daughter's body, her womb, her grief, it was all just a failed startup. I looked at Ryan. He wasn't enraged anymore. He was just nodding. He was standing beside his mother, his arms crossed, in perfect, chilling agreement. This was their language. This was the bottom line. This was the performance review. She's a failed investment, Clara. Elaine's voice was soft now, pitying. And that was the part that finally, truly, broke me. The condescension. We needed a partner for Ryan. A producer. Her eyes flickered down to Sophie, who was curled on the couch, shivering in my coat, her face pale and waxy. Elaine's perfect glossed lips curled, just slightly, in a grimace of pure biological disgust. Not a bug in the system. Bug. That was the word, the final word. Not a daughter, not a wife, not a woman, not even a failed investment, a bug. Something small and dirty and wrong, an error in the code, something to be isolated, walled off, and left on a cold patio until it, what? Froze? Died? Debug her system. That's what Ryan had said on the phone. I finally understood. He didn't want to debug her. He wanted to delete her. I felt something shift in my chest. The surgeon's cold, analytical mind snapped shut. The ER doctor who triaged and saved. She was gone. The part of me that was left was just a mother. And she was done diagnosing. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten them. What was the point? You don't argue with a virus. You don't negotiate with a bug. You eradicate it. I bent down. My knees screamed in protest from a lifetime of standing over operating tables, but I didn't care. I slid one arm under Sophie's back, the other under her knees. "We're going home, baby," I whispered, my lips brushing her icy hair. She moaned, her body stiff and cold, but I pulled her against my chest. She weighed nothing. I stood up, holding my daughter. I turned my back on them. On the ruined door, the glass-covered rug, the cold fireplace, the half-eaten food, I started to walk. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers, Clara," Ryan shouted at my back. His voice had found its bluster again, the coward's last resort. "For the door, for trespassing. You can't just—" I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, my boots crunching on the shattered glass, one slow, steady, deliberate step after another. I carried my daughter out of the hole I had made, out of that sterile, cold, inhuman box, and back into the storm. The sleet hit my face, and for the first time that night, it felt good. It felt clean. I don't know how long I drove. 5 minutes, maybe 15. The sleet was so thick, the world outside my Volvo was just a blur of white static and red taillights. I had Sophie buckled into the passenger seat, still wrapped in my heavy wool coat. She hadn't said a word. She was just shivering, a deep bone-rattling cold that the car's heater, even on full blast, couldn't seem to touch. The Yeti cooler, with the 15-pound brisket, was still in the back seat. The rich, smoky smell of it, which had felt like home just an hour ago, now felt obscene. It filled the car with a warmth that felt like a lie. I saw a sign through the ice, its neon red bleeding into the storm. "L.A. Quinta Inn. Vacancy." I pulled in. I parked the car, not near our room but right by the front office, under the bright, humming lights of the entryway. I needed light. I needed other people. I half-carried, half-dragged Sophie through the automatic doors. The lobby was aggressively bright, smelling of stale coffee and industrial-strength carpet cleaner. The girl at the desk, no older than 20, looked up from her phone, her eyes wide. She was probably wondering why a 60-year-old woman was dragging a barefoot girl in a giant coat through her lobby at 9 p.m. I didn't give her a chance to ask. I put my credit card on the counter. 1 room, 2 queens, closest one you've got. She gave me the key cards. Room 112. The room was a room. Brown carpet, brown polyester bedspreads, art on the wall of a vaguely Tuscan hill. It was anonymous. It was perfect. I cranked the heater unit under the window. It kicked on with a loud thunk and a roar, blasting out air that smelled like burnt dust. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Shower, Sophie, now." My voice was the one I used in the ER. No room for argument. "As hot as you can stand it." She nodded, her movements stiff and robotic, and disappeared into the bathroom. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain lock into its groove. Thwack. A solid, final sound. We were safe, and then I heard it. The sound of the water turning on, and then Underneath it, a noise I hadn't heard from my daughter in years, not since she was a little girl who'd fallen off her bike. A raw, ragged, gulping sob, the kind that rips its way out of you. I sat on the edge of one of the beds, the stiff comforter crackling under my weight, and I just listened. I listened to my daughter cry out 2 years of optimization and protocols and failed investments. I let her. It was the only way to get the poison out. After a long time, the water shut off. The door opened. She came out, wrapped in a thin white motel towel, bleached so many times it was practically sandpaper. Her skin was red, raw from the heat, but the blue tint was gone. She looked, hollowed out. Like someone had taken a scoop and just dug out the bright, fiery girl I remembered, leaving this empty, fragile shell. She sat on the other bed, tucking her feet under her. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at the ugly painting of the hill. "They're right, Mom," she whispered. Her voice was scratchy from the crying. I didn't breathe. "What?" "They're right." She finally looked at me, and her eyes. God, her eyes. They were dead. All the fight was gone. "I'm a failure. I'm a bug." She said it. She used their word for herself. I cost them so much money. Her voice was a flat monotone, like she was reading items from a grocery list. The IVF, the specialists, the counseling. She spat that last word out like it was a curse. I couldn't even perform. I couldn't do the one thing I was supposed to do. Her hands twisted in the towel. "I can't even give them a grandchild." She looked at me, her face crumpling. I'm 0 ROI, Mom. I'm just a failed investment. I had spent my entire life, my entire career, learning to be calm, to be detached, to look at a shattered body and see a puzzle to be solved. In that moment, I wanted to burn the world down. Instead, I stood up. I crossed the small space between the beds in 2 steps. I knelt on the scratchy carpet, in front of my daughter. And I took her face in my hands, my rough, scarred surgeon's hands. "Listen to me," I said. My voice was low, and it wasn't soft. It was hard. It was the voice I used at 3 a.m. when I was ordering a nurse to push EPI. I was an ER surgeon for 40 years. She flinched, but I held her gaze. "I know what failure looks like. I've held it in my hands. I've watched it flatline. I know what it smells like, what it feels like." I leaned in, so my face was inches from hers. "This," I said, "is not it. This is not failure. This is abuse." Her breath hitched. A single tear rolled down her face. "You," I said, my grip tightening, "are not a project." I tapped her chest with my finger. "You are a person." I tapped her again. "You are not an investment." I tapped her one last time, right over her heart. "You are my daughter." She was sobbing now, a silent, shaking kind of cry. "They took your grief," I said, my voice shaking with the rage I was holding back, "and they rebranded it as a software bug. They took your soul, and they called it non-compliant. That is not a family. That is a corporation, and they are toxic." I stood up, pulling her with me. I held her by her shoulders, her thin, bare shoulders. "And tomorrow," I said, "tomorrow you are going to call a lawyer." I gave her a little shake, forcing her to meet my eyes. "And you," I said, "are going to fire them." She stared at me, the motel towel clutched in her hands. The word fire hung in the air, sharp and clean. It was a word of action, a word of power. It wasn't the language of victims. It wasn't leave him or run away. It was fire them. It reframed her as the boss, and she uncurled, just a little. The next 2 months were a special kind of hell. This wasn't the acute, screaming trauma of the ER. This was the slow, grinding pain of a chronic disease. The legal system. We found a lawyer, not a shark. I didn't want a shark. Sharks just thrash and bleed. I wanted a surgeon. I found her in a quiet, 2-story limestone building in Old Austin, far from the new glass towers. Her name was Miss Hayes. She was a woman in her 60s, like me, with steel gray hair in a tight bun and eyes that didn't miss a single damn thing. She specialized in complex contractual disputes. The first volley from Ryan's legal team was pure, uncut arrogance. A courier delivered a box to my apartment in Houston, where Sophie was staying with me, sleeping in her old childhood room. Inside was a bill for $22,500 for property damages to the Westlake Hills residents. Underneath that was the prenup. It wasn't a document, it was a weapon. I read it in my kitchen, a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. It was 40 pages of ironclad, corporate-laced cruelty. It outlined Sophie's duties as a wife, duties she had failed to perform. It stipulated in excruciating detail that in the event of a divorce, she would be entitled to her personal clothing, any gifts I had given her, and nothing else. No house, no spousal support, no portion of the tech stock fortune they had built while she was being systematically destroyed. It was a document designed to punish her for being a failed investment. It was designed to turn her into a bug and delete her. Sophie read it, and all the strength I'd tried to pour into her in that motel room just drained away. "Just let me sign it, Mom," she whispered, her hands shaking. "I'll sign it. I don't care. I just want it to be over. I'll get a job at a coffee shop. I don't care." I took the document from her. "No," I said. "We don't sign. We read. In my work, you never rush a diagnosis. You never just glance at the chart and start cutting. You read every line. You look for the anomaly, the one thing that doesn't fit." We sat in Miss Hayes's quiet, book-lined office. She had the prenup spread out on her wide mahogany desk, not like a contract, but like an X-ray on a light box. Ryan's lawyers were loud. They filed motions painting Sophie as emotionally volatile and mentally unstable, using the very depression they had caused as a weapon against her. They were trying to build a case that she had been the one to violate the marriage, that her erratic behavior, like being locked outside in a freezing storm, was proof of her instability. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. It was the legal version of, "She locked herself out." Miss Hayes didn't respond to their noise. She didn't file angry counter-motions. She just read. She read that 40-page document over and over, marking it up with a fine-point red pen. "He's a very arrogant man, isn't he, your son-in-law?" she said one afternoon, not looking up. "He's not my son-in-law," I said. "He's the disease." She gave a small, thin smile. "Indeed." She tapped a page with the tip of her pen. "Mr. Caldwell, his attorney, is one of those shark types. He's very proud of his work. He thinks this document is a fortress. And it is. It's designed to keep Sophie in her box and out of the money." She continued, "But Ryan couldn't help himself. He's a man who needs to control everything. He needs leverage." She turned the document around and slid it across the desk to us. Her red pen had circled an entire section. "Article 4, she said. "The morality clause." I read it. It was vile. It was a list of behaviors that Sophie was forbidden from engaging in. Infidelity, public intoxication, acts of moral turpitude, or any action that could bring the family name into disrepute or cause severe emotional or financial harm to the husband. If she violated any of them, the entire prenup was voided, and she would be left with, literally, nothing. It was his emergency delete button. "This is horrible," Sophie whispered, shrinking. "It's just more proof." "No, dear," Miss Hayes said, her voice turning sharp and clean like a scalpel. "It's not proof. It's the key." She leaned forward. "He was so obsessed with controlling your behavior, he never imagined it could be applied to his. The clause is written to apply to either party." Miss Hayes tapped the page again, her fingernail making a sharp click. "He was even arrogant enough to define his terms. Look at 4B. Acts of moral turpitude are defined as, and I quote, "the willful infliction of bodily or severe emotional harm, or the act of placing the partner in a state of reckless endangerment." I looked up from the page. Miss Hayes was smiling. "He built a fortress," she said, "and he was so proud of it, he handed us the only key. He didn't just define his own crime, Clara. He gave us the weapon to prosecute it. And the day came to fire that weapon. We weren't in a grand, wood-paneled courtroom. We were in a sterile, windowless deposition room on the 30th floor of a glass tower. The air smelled like old paper and industrial carpet. It was the definition of slow burn. Ryan was there, flanked by 2 lawyers in identical razor-sharp navy suits. One of them was Caldwell, the shark. Ryan was leaning back in his chair, tapping a rhythm on his smartwatch, looking profoundly bored. He was optimizing his time by checking his stock alerts. Elaine was there too. Not at the table, but sitting in a chair against the wall, like a queen observing a dull joust. She was there to project power, to remind the room who really mattered. They'd spent the entire morning painting Sophie as a hysterical child. They'd put me on the stand. Caldwell, the shark, had circled me for an hour. "Dr. Clark, you admit to taking a tire iron from your car." "Yes, it was the necessary tool." "A tire iron," he'd scoffed, for the court reporter, "and you admit to trespassing on private property." "I was rendering aid to my daughter who was in medical distress." "So, in your medical opinion, vandalism is a standard treatment for, what was it, a sad mood?" I'd leaned forward, just slightly. I placed my hands on the table. My scarred, surgeon's hands. "Counsel." I diagnosed stage 2 hypothermia. The patient's core temperature was dropping. She was cyanotic and tachycardic. The locked door was the obstruction. I removed the obstruction. I would do it again. My clinical bored tone had thrown him. He couldn't get the hysterical mother soundbite he wanted. He dismissed me with a wave. "We have nothing further for this witness," he'd said, as if the word left a bad taste in his mouth. Now, it was Miss Hayes's turn. She sat at the head of the table, her files arranged in 3 neat, small stacks. She was the picture of calm. "The plaintiff calls Mr. Ben Carter," she said, her voice quiet. The door opened. Ryan and Elaine didn't even look up. Ben walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a clean-pressed blue work shirt with Carter Design Plus build embroidered over the pocket. He was wearing work boots. He looked tangible. He looked real in this room of expensive illusions. He sat down, his calloused hands resting on the table. He looked terrified, but he also looked solid. Ryan looked up from his watch. His eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected this. This was dirty data. This was a bug in his system. Miss Hayes smiled, a thin, polite smile. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Could you state your profession for the record?" "I'm a builder," Ben said, his voice deep and steady, "a custom woodworker and contractor." "And what is your relationship to my client, Sophie Scott?" We went to art school together. We're friends." "And what is your relationship to the defendant, Mr. Caldwell?" Ben's jaw tightened. "My company was hired to do the custom installation work at his residence in Westlake Hills." Caldwell the shark was no longer tapping. He was sitting up straight. Elaine, against the wall, had uncrossed her legs. "Mr. Carter," Miss Hayes continued, her voice gentle, "were you called to the Caldwell Scott residence on or around the date of the incident?" "Yes, ma'am. The day of. I was there that morning." "And why were you called?" "To repair the smart lock on the main patio door. The one made of glass. The air in the room went from stale to vacuum sealed." "And what was the problem with the lock, Mr. Carter?" "It was malfunctioning. A software bug," they said. "It was locking. Well, it was locking people out. The external keypad wasn't responding." "So, you were there to fix a lock that was trapping people outside the house?" "Yes, ma'am." "And did you speak with Mr. Caldwell that day?" "I spoke to him on a video service call later that afternoon," Ben said, his eyes fixed on Miss Hayes. "A follow-up, to test the remote override from his phone." Ryan was pale. He was staring at Ben, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man watching a piece of code he'd written suddenly become self-aware. "And what happened on that video call, Ben?" Miss Hayes's voice was soft. "Show, don't tell." Ben took a deep breath. "We were on the call. I was on my laptop, back at my workshop. He was at his house, walking around. We were testing the connection, and Mrs. Caldwell, Elaine." She walked into the room. Elaine, against the wall, went rigid. "And what did she say?" Ben's eyes flickered to Elaine, then back to Miss Hayes. "She was angry," she said. "She's having another one of her breakdowns. Another stunt," she said. "Just leave her out there. A little cold might reset her." A strangled sound came from Sophie, who was sitting next to me. I grabbed her hand under the table. Caldwell, the shark, was on his feet. "Objection, hearsay. This is irrelevant slander. It goes directly to willful infliction of emotional harm." "Counsel," Miss Hayes said calmly, not even looking at him, "as defined in your own document. Please, sit down." She turned back to Ben. "And what did Mr. Caldwell do, Ben?" When his mother said that. This was it. The click. The moment the lock engages. Ben swallowed. He looked at me. right at the camera. He knew I was there. He knew I'd heard. And he smiled, Ben whispered. And then he hit the mute button. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Caldwell, the shark, was as white as his starched shirt. Ryan looked like he was going to be sick. Miss Hayes leaned forward. The final, clean incision. And this video call, Mr. Carter, as a professional contractor, is it your company's standard policy for quality assurance to record all video service calls and archive them? Ben Carter, the builder, the friend, the witness, looked from the ghost-white face of Ryan Caldwell to the steel-gray eyes of Miss Hayes. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We record everything." Miss Hayes turned to the court reporter, her voice bright and clear. "Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to enter into evidence. Exhibit A, a time-stamped, unedited, high-definition video recording proving willful, reckless endangerment and the intentional infliction of severe emotional harm." Checkmate. I looked at Ryan. I looked at Elaine. The bug in the system hadn't just been a bug. It had been a virus, and it had just copied their entire hard drive. That video file, that Exhibit A, it landed on the polished mahogany table with the virtual weight of a dropped anchor. The silence that followed was nothing like the quiet of Miss Hayes's office. This was a clinical silence. The kind in an ER when a flatline tone cuts out and the only sound left is the whoosh of the ventilator. It was the sound of an ending. Caldwell, the shark, was no longer a shark. He was a fish on a hook. His mouth was open. His face was a pasty, sick gray. He looked at Ryan, then at Elaine, then at the USB drive on the table as if it were a live grenade. Ryan. He was finally recalibrating. His face was twitching. He kept opening his optimized health app on his watch, staring at his heart rate, as if the data was lying to him. He looked like a man whose entire operating system had just crashed. But Elaine, she was the one I watched. She didn't move. She didn't gasp. She just deflated. Her perfect, aristocratic posture collapsed, just slightly. Her shoulders slumped. She'd spent her life managing assets, and she knew, in that instant, that she was looking at a total, catastrophic loss. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was just liquidated. Caldwell found his voice first, a dry croak. We will need to take a recess to verify the authenticity of this material." Miss Hayes, my surgeon, didn't even smile. She just folded her hands on her neat stack of files. "Of course, counsel. Take all the time you need. We'll be right here. Or, perhaps, you'd prefer to discuss a settlement. In which case, my client has a few non-negotiable terms." Caldwell grabbed the drive and his briefcase and practically dragged Ryan out of the room. 2 hours later, we were back at the table. The arrogance was gone. The bluster was gone. All the expensive, optimized hot air had been sucked out of the room. It was just a group of very tired, very pale people in expensive suits. Miss Hayes slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a list of terms. The prenup, with its morality clause, was null and void. Sophie would receive exactly 50% of all shared assets, including stock options and the full, appraised value of the glass and steel prison in Westlake Hills. And, as a final, beautiful scalpel twist, Ryan and Elaine would be paying my invoice for $22,500 for the necessary medical extraction and property remediation. And, of course, all our legal fees. Ryan's hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. He signed. Elaine watched him, her face as blank and cold as the glass I had shattered. But here's the thing I've learned. The legal system. It's just the first clumsy incision. It removes the primary tumor. But the real disease, the bug in the system that Elaine was so worried about, it was their reputation. And in their world, reputation isn't just everything. It's the only thing. The official settlement was sealed, confidential. But Ben's video, that wasn't part of the settlement. I don't know who leaked it. Maybe it was Ben who felt he owed it to Sophie. Maybe it was a disgruntled former employee at Ryan's company, one of the hundreds he'd deprecated over the years. It didn't matter. It didn't show up on the evening news. It showed up somewhere far more lethal, a snarky, influential Austin tech blog. The headline was brutal. Zero ROI. Leaked video shows Austin's optimized CEO and mother leaving wife to freeze. The post was merciless. It used all their own words against them. Failed investment. Recalibrating. A little cold might reset her. The blog post was a match. The tech world, hungry for gossip and a break from the genius worship, was the gasoline. In 24 hours, zero ROI was trending. It was a meme. Ryan wasn't just a cruel husband, he was a bad investment. He was a liability. His company's stock, the one he checked on his watch, began to recalibrate. It dropped 15 points, then 30. The board of directors, the real power, the people who actually owned the genius, called an emergency meeting. They weren't angry about his morality. They were furious about his optics. He was no longer a visionary. He was a joke. He was a bug in the system that was costing them billions. They didn't just ask for his resignation. They invoked his contract's morality clause. They fired him. They deprecated him. They took back all his unvested stocks and kicked him out of the glass tower he had built. And Elaine. Oh, Elaine. Her punishment was quieter. And, to her, so much worse. She didn't run a tech company. Her ROI was her social standing, her name on the donor plaques, her seat on the board of the Austin Symphony. 2 weeks after the deposition, she received a short, polite email. The symphony board was moving in a different strategic direction and appreciated her years of service. She was out. She hadn't just lost her reputation. She had lost her relevance. She was no longer a queen. She was just an old, rich, cruel woman in a big, empty house with a broken, boarded-up door. I'd spent my life as a surgeon, trying to save lives. But in this case, I realized my job was different. I wasn't there to save Ryan or Elaine. I was there to excise them. You don't get angry at a tumor. You don't try to reason with it. You just cut it out, cleanly, and you let the patient, my daughter, finally begin to heal. But healing isn't like a clean excision. You don't just cut it out and walk away. The surgery is the easy part. The real work is the recovery, the physical therapy. It's the slow, painful, day-by-day process of rebuilding what was torn apart. It's learning to trust your own body, your own mind, again. 6 months later, I was back in Austin. The sleet and ice were a distant memory, replaced by a heavy, humid, Central Texas heat. I wasn't in Westlake Hills. I was in East Austin, a part of the city that was still gritty and real and alive. I was standing on a dusty plot of land, on the corner of a street that smelled like tacos and diesel fumes. The air was split by the pop, pop, pop of nail guns and the whine of a circular saw. In front of me, hammered into the dry, cracked dirt, was a huge, colorful sign. It wasn't a sleek, minimalist corporate logo. It was a painting. A bright, fiery, messy painting of a phoenix rising, its wings spread wide, and in bold, hand-painted letters it read, "The Sophie and Ben Design Co., Building Austin's Future." And there, in the middle of a maze of 2x4s that would one day be a home, was my daughter. She was wearing a white hard hat, scuffed with blue paint. Her hair was jammed into a messy bun, and a worn leather tool belt was slung low on her hips. She was holding a set of blueprints, unrolled and flapping in the breeze. She was in a deep, animated argument with a framer, a burly guy twice her size. "No," she said, her voice clear and carrying over the noise. I could hear it from the street. "No, you can't just shift it. That's a load-bearing wall, Miguel. Look at the specs. We do it right, or we do it twice. We do it right." She wasn't yelling. She wasn't pleading. She was just stating a fact. She was the authority. The big framer grunted, stared at his own plans, and then he nodded. He actually smiled. "You got it, boss. We'll reframe it." "Boss." Just then, Ben walked up, carrying 2 styrofoam cups of coffee from the food truck on the corner. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't pat her on the back or put his arm around her. He just waited, his presence calm and steady, until she'd finished. She turned, saw him, and her whole face softened. He handed her a cup. "You think that new crossbeam is solid?" he asked, looking up at the skeleton of the house. Sophie took a long sip, leaving a little smudge of dirt on the white cup. "I think," she said, "it's the strongest part of the whole damn house." She looked at him, and she smiled. It wasn't a Band-Aid. It wasn't a tight, thin, terrified smile. It was a real one. It was the smile from her college dorm, the one that I thought had been deprecated. It was so bright, it felt like the sun had just come out from behind a cloud. She finally saw me, standing by the sign, watching. Her face lit up. She didn't drop everything and run over. She didn't need to. She just raised her coffee cup to me. A toast. Across the noise and the sawdust. I raised my hand. I waved back. A single, hot tear, the one I hadn't let fall in that cold deposition room, finally rolled down my cheek. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. My daughter wasn't a failed investment. She wasn't a bug in the system. She was the architect. She was the builder. She'd been through a fire that should have leveled her to the ground, and here she was, standing on the ashes, holding the blueprints for her new life. And this time, she was building it to last. I stood there by that hand-painted sign, long after she and Ben had turned back to their work. I watched her. I watched her gesture with her hands, her movements sharp and certain. I watched her laugh, a real, from the gut laugh that the wind carried over to me. I thought about the last time I'd seen her gesture. In that glass box, her hands pressed against the pane, her face pale, her movements small and terrified. I thought about my own hands, my scarred, surgeon's hands. For 40 years, I was a fixer. That's what a trauma surgeon is. You're a high-stakes mechanic. A body comes in, broken, bleeding, full of holes. You don't ask why, you don't care about the story. You just fix. You plug the holes, you stop the bleeding, you set the bones, you cut out the disease, you remove the bullet, you find the damage, and you repair it. I thought I could do that with Sophie. I thought I could drive to Austin, diagnose the problem, and fix it. I thought I could be the surgeon. I'd find the disease, Ryan. Elaine. I'd make the incision. I'd cut them out, and she'd be healed. But that's not how life works. That's not how the soul works. The legal battle? That was just the surgery. That was the excision. It was messy, it was necessary, but it wasn't the cure. The cure, that was this. This dusty lot. This noisy, chaotic, beautiful process. Ryan and Elaine, they operated on a different system, a clean one, a system of inputs and outputs, of data and projections. They measured life in ROI, return on investment, and they were right. Sophie was a failed investment. For them, because they had invested in a product. They put their money into a wife who was supposed to produce an heir. They invested in a silent, beautiful, optimized partner. They wanted a return. And when the product line failed, when the machine broke, they wrote it off. They tried to delete the bug. What they never understood, what people like them can't understand, is that a human being isn't a stock. You're not supposed to get a return on your love. Love is the investment. The love is the return. They thought her value was in her womb. They thought her worth was in her compliance. They never, not once, looked at her hands. They never saw the paint under her nails. They never saw the girl who could build a 6-foot canvas and paint a phoenix so bright it looked like it could fly. They saw an analog hobby. They deprecated it. They tried to recalibrate her, but they broke the one thing they should have been terrified of, her heart. And in doing so, they unleashed the one thing they couldn't control, her mother. As a surgeon, I spent my life patching up the damage people did to each other. I've stitched up knife wounds. I've pulled bullets out of chests. But I learned that the deepest wounds, they're not the ones you can see on an X-ray. They're the ones made of words. 0 ROI, failed investment, bug in the system. Those words are worse than any bullet. They don't just damage the flesh, they're designed to liquidate the soul, to convince you that your very existence is a mistake. For 2 months, Sophie slept in my guest room, and she would wake up screaming, not because she was on a cold patio, but because she was dreaming of a balance sheet, and her name was at the bottom, in red ink. My job wasn't to be a surgeon. My job was to be a mother, to sit with her in that darkness and hold her steady, and be the one unwavering voice that told her, "You are not a bug. You are not a line item. You are not a project. You are a person, and your worth, Your worth is not negotiable. I looked back at the build site. Sophie was laughing, her head thrown back, the sun catching the sawdust in her hair. That was her ROI. It wasn't in a bank account. It wasn't in a stock portfolio. It was in that sound, the sound of her laughter. It was in the strength of that new, load-bearing wall. It was in the blueprint she was holding in her own, steady, capable hands. They measured her in dollars and cents. They tried to delete her. And in the end, they were the ones who got deleted. And my daughter, the failed investment. She'd taken their blood money, and she was using it to build a foundation. So let me ask you, in a world that's always trying to put a price tag on you, that's always trying to measure your performance, what is your ROI? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.